My name's Mark Gurvis. I was privileged to serve as CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver from March 2002 until August 2013. I have been a lifetime career professional in the Jewish Federations. It's a commitment I made early on and have enjoyed the opportunity to have impact on Jewish life and community through this work. I was drawn to Federation through my experience as a student leader in Hillel. I went to school at State University of New York at Albany, in Hillel there, where I was vice president, chair of the UJA campaign, got all of its support from the local federation in Albany. I got to know the federation professionals, lay leadership, and through that process got exposed to what a federation does, its impact on community, building Jewish life and community, and made a decision by the time I'd come out of my undergraduate career that this is actually the work that I wanted to do for my life. In late 2001, I was at a point in my career where I was looking at and ready for a change, looking for an executive leadership opportunity. I learned that the Vancouver Federation was in a search, and from my knowledge of the community and my exposure to Vancouver from my honeymoon, it was an option that my wife and I were interested in pursuing. So that led me into the search process, and with a successful candidacy, ended up being offered the position. I made the choice of career to focus on Federation because I had the firsthand exposure at a very early stage to the kind of impact federations have in mobilizing resources to meet Jewish needs, in building community and connecting people to Israel. That was true back in the late 1980s when I made that choice. It's still true today. And through my experiences in Cleveland, Vancouver, now at the national level, working with Jewish Federations of North America, I still find, for me, that is the most impactful way to affect Jewish life. In 2002, when I started working with the Federation in Vancouver, there were a lot of challenges. There were also a lot of opportunities, but the challenges stemmed from some basic demographic realities of the community and the way the Jewish community had evolved over time. Vancouver historically was a very small Jewish community, and then in the mid-1980s, after Vancouver hosted the World Expo, the population started booming. The change in Hong Kong also drove population from Asia into the greater Vancouver area, and things started taking off. The general population grew, the Jewish population grew, the Jewish population started to disperse. And so while the community used to be 5,000 to 7,000 Jews concentrated in a couple of miles within the Oak Street corridor, after a number of years, the community was probably in excess of 25,000 Jews, and within a 50 to 70 kilometer radius of that Oak Street corridor. So that's a big change for the community. A lot of challenges in connecting people to the community, in lack of institutional infrastructure, in the more outlying parts of the community, people feeling connected and part of Jewish life. And I would say another significant challenge stems from the fact that even with all that growth, the Jewish population in the Lower Mainland is still a very small percentage of the overall population. If you compare the Jewish density in the Lower Mainland to the experience for the Jewish community in Toronto or the Jewish community in Montreal, those Jewish communities represent a critical mass as part of the larger population. That is just not the case in the Lower Mainland. And that means as people are traveling through the community, they just see less presence, less evidence of Jewish life, less institutional infrastructure. And that can make it harder for people to connect, for people to feel like they're part of a community. I think that's always been part of the story in the Lower Mainland. It's still a challenge, but I think the community has grown. It's grown stronger, it's grown more visible, and those changes, I'm sure, are still continuing to unfold. Another challenge as I came into the community in 2002 related to the relative youth of the Federation and the challenges in growing the fundraising achievements of the Federation. So by the time I had arrived, fundraising had been relatively stable, annual fundraising of about $4 million a year, give or take a couple of $100,000 either way, and it hadn't really changed for some number of years. And so for the Federation, and the Federation in relation to other institutions, that created a climate of unmet expectations, having made the effort relatively late to create a Jewish Federation. So I think there was some degree of frustration, some degree of still waiting for Federation to prove that it could have a significant impact in the community. One of the things that attracted me to choose Vancouver was my sense that there was a lot of opportunity. It was a growing community. It had stable fundraising, but from my perspective, lots of room for growth. And for me, the opportunity to come to a community, try to help catalyze growth, try to help move things to a different place was an exciting opportunity. What I'm most proud of from my tenure in Vancouver was the ability to move the Federation and its position in the community from one of tentativeness to really establishing it as a strong presence in the community for the vitality and growth of the community as a whole. We were able to move annual fundraising from about $4 million to about $7.5 million. The endowment growth, I believe during that time, was from a base of about 13 million to, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, we were approaching or maybe even above $30 million at the time I left. I might have that wrong. We had rebalanced the allocations between Israel and overseas and domestic needs in a way that actually fueled the growth, so that even while we were correcting a shift of funding that had diminished the overseas commitment, we put dollars back into overseas needs, we were also at the same time able to raise more money than we ever had before for Vancouver's growing Jewish community. So it really became a situation where the tide was helping all boats rise. And I think that impact wasn't only for the Federation itself. During that time, there are other institutions in the community that took on very significant and ambitious capital projects, far beyond what the community, I think, previously thought that it would be able to achieve. And whether you look at the Vancouver Talmud Torah Capital Campaign, efforts at the Louis Breyer, efforts that the JCC undertook, efforts that the Congregation Beth Israel undertook, many of them succeeded beyond their expectations in being able to raise significant dollars in the community. So I think the community became more confident in itself and more proud about what it could achieve. I think the other thing that I would point to is the way we built out our relationship with what the Federation was funding and connecting to in Israel. We dramatically increased the funding going overseas. We built a lot of it around our partnership region in the Upper Galilee Panhandle, a relationship that we share with the other smaller federations in Canada, aside from Toronto and Montreal. And we really made Vancouver a presence in the Upper Galilee to the extent where I think really every family with children would know that they had a relationship through their schools, through their community centers, through the youth center, through leadership training opportunities, that there were people in Vancouver who were invested in their community and connected with them. I think what drove home for me the fact that we were really making the connection between the Lower Mainland and the Upper Galilee a real thing was when I started to see the same young adults from Kiryat Shimona or from some of the kibbutzim for the second or third or fourth time, either in Vancouver or in their home community, as we were encountering them in different programs that we were involved with. And that's when you start to realize that you're involved with people in a very deep way in their lives and having a pretty rich impact. And the impact wasn't only on young people and their families in the communities in Israel that we were investing in, because so much of the work was involved in building relationships between our community and their community. The impact was also in our own families in Vancouver, which were hosting these kids on their visits, or the teens who were having exchange visits back and forth. I know of examples where kids finished high school out of Vancouver and spent summers in the Upper Galilee because they wanted to spend more time with the families and kids that they'd gotten connected to through the programs that we were operating with. We used to say, I hope we still say, that we wanted young people in the Lower Mainland to grow up knowing that they had family in the Upper Galilee, and young people in the Upper Galilee to grow up knowing they had family in Vancouver. So I think the Lower Mainland continues to grow and evolve. I think the demographic changes that were underway when I first arrived continue to evolve. The real estate values in the Lower Mainland continue to rise, and that continues to be a challenge, I think, in many ways for Vancouver as a city, for the Lower Mainland as a region, and for the Jewish community within. It's becoming increasingly challenging for young families to establish themselves and to be able to buy a home near where most of the communal infrastructure sits. That means it's all the more important to continue focusing on strengthening the Jewish communal infrastructure and vibrancy of Jewish life in Richmond, on the North Shore, out in Surrey, in Coquitlam, in other outlying communities. So I think that was already happening when I got there. It continues and is probably increasing as a challenge for the community to address. I think the growing confidence of the community has been terrific. I'm so thrilled that the Federation has continued to grow since I left. Nothing makes me prouder to know that I was able to catalyze growth and lay a foundation that others have been able to build with and grow from. And kol hakavod to the leadership and my professional colleagues who have continued to drive the enterprise forward. The almost 12 years that my family and I spent in Vancouver were a really precious and special time in our lives. We have many connections still with the community. We've been back to visit several times. I'm sure that will continue to be the case. We have a lot of love for all of our family and friends in we have a lot of love for all of our friends in the Lower Mainland, and we wish all success for the Federation and for the community in the years to come. I think one particularly special achievement was the community's response to the Second Lebanon War in 2006. And Vancouver raised, I think it was $4.3 million in that emergency campaign. It was an extraordinary response. In many ways, we led the way for the other smaller communities across Canada to raise the bar and do the most they could at that very challenging time for Israel. What we were able to do strategically, pooling our funds with the other smaller communities and even leveraging resources from Toronto and Montreal, had such an enormous impact on such an enormous impact on life in the Upper Galilee. You can look back today and see the growth of Tel Chai College, the development of the youth center in Kiryat Shmona, the development of the medical school in Tzfat, and countless other major projects that were undertaken as a result of that emergency fundraising drive. And we can know that we had a profound impact in not only helping the region recover from the war, but actually come back stronger than it was before the war ever happened.